prayer is one of the most important things in Islam. If you claim to be a Muslim, if you value the Quran, you have to understand that without prayer you cannot be successful. That's a simple fact. So if you claim to be a Muslim and you don't pray, you have a serious problem. Now, one shouldn't see prayer as pray for points type of a structure that a lot of priests and imams that they propagate this idea to where if you pray this particular day you get the worth of 7 prayers. If you pray this particular time you get 10 more prayers. You have prayer multipliers and all that stuff, which is just nonsense. It doesn't work like that. It's not intended for that. God clearly defines in the Quran what the purpose of prayer is, what to watch out for, and we are definitely told that we need to pray. So God, right off the bat, in the 2nd chapter, in verse 3, says, this book, there is no doubt in it, is a guide for those who are careful of their duty, the muttaqeen. And then God describes them. Those who believe in the unseen and keep up prayer and give out of what we have given them. So one of the defining characteristics of the righteous people is that they pray. Now, what is the purpose of prayer? So actually prayer has several purposes. When God talks to, I think it was either Noah or Abraham, in chapter 20, verse 14, he says, "Surely I am God. There is no God but I. Therefore keep up prayer. Therefore serve me and keep up prayer for my remembrance." So there we are told, even back then, prayer was an ordained thing. And one of the purposes of prayer is remembering God. And we are told in chapter 29, verse 45, "Recite that which has been revealed to you of your Lord and keep up prayer. Surely prayer keeps away from indecency and evil, and remembrance of God is greatest. And God knows what you do." So here we are told that prayer keeps us away from indecency and evil works. But the greatest purpose of prayer is remembrance of God. And one can easily argue, so if you don't pray, right, you can have a busy day, and I've had several of these busy days at work, where you don't think about anything but the task at hand. You don't think about God for a second until prayer time comes. Now, some people are able to do this, but I think most people, if they are distracted enough, if they are busy enough, if they are worried enough, they just don't. They can't. Nobody can. Nobody can remember God, remember the reality of God, if they are not trained to stop. Stop what you're doing. It's prayer time. You can take these 5 minutes and refocus. Now, that is just a simplified point, that life is so busy, it's so distracting, that if you are not careful, you will forget about God. And that's a fact of life. That is a fact of life. You may remember every so often, maybe in Ramadan or when somebody dies, but that's not what you need. You need it daily. You need to remember God every day. You need to remember reality every day, because once you forget reality, once you forget God, you start to run into problems. So, given that one of the main purposes of prayer is remembrance of God, we are told in the Quran in chapter 43, verses 36 through 37, "And whoever turns away from the remembrance of the Most Merciful, we appoint to him a shaitan, a devil, so he becomes his companion. And most surely they turn him away from the path, the right path, but they think that they are guided." So you stop praying, you continue to think that you are a Muslim, you continue to think that you are on the right path, except you're not. You have this voice inside your head that's telling you you're doing good, even though you're doing everything God forbade. So if you turn away from remembrance of God, God appoints to you a devil who will continue to lead you away from the straight path, and yet you will think that you are doing good. So you will seldom get this realization, oh my God, I am doing terrible. You're just going to go through life thinking you're doing fine. But God warns you about that in the Quran. So think about it. Whoever turns away from the remembrance of the Most Merciful. And what did God say is the most important purpose of prayer? Remembrance of God. So that's basically saying if you turn away from prayer, you will not walk on the right path, and yet you will think you're doing fine. So remembrance of God being the most important. Turning away from that remembrance, what happens, right? So you shouldn't need more than that. So the righteous are defined as praying. You have the people who have neglected prayer. What happens to them? As a matter of fact, there's also a verse that talks about the previous generations, and I can't remember what that verse is right now. But basically, it says, "And after them came an evil generation, and they neglected prayer." Who neglected prayer and continued to take the goods of this low life while saying we will be forgiven. And I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly, but the moral of that lesson is those people, previous generations, who neglected prayer, who just thought that they were going to be forgiven and yet continued to follow the lusts of this world. It literally tells you what happened to them. And since there is no change in God's law, that is what's going to happen to people who follow the same pattern in our time. So if you fall under that category, and you may not think that you fall under that category because since you don't pray, you think you're a Muslim, you think you're on the right path, you may not even realize that is describing you because of that shaitan that got appointed to you. Now he's your friend. Now he's telling you, look, man, you're doing fine. So that's all on that topic. But that's not all on the topic of prayer. So in chapter 29:45, God says, "And recite that which has been revealed to you from your Lord. And keep up prayer. Surely prayer keeps away from indecency and evil." So we touched on how it keeps away, how it helps you remember God and why remembrance of God is important. But we did not talk about how it keeps away from indecency and evil, and this part, which I'm going to talk about now. And recite that which has been revealed to you from your Lord. You have to learn what is expected of you. You have to learn the law. You have to learn how to behave. And what better way to teach people, even illiterate people, even people in a society that is collapsing, that doesn't have any schools? What better way to teach them than to have them stand focused several times a day, listening to the commandments of God, listening to what they're supposed to do? So that is another reason why prayers are commanded and why we are expected to recite the Quran in prayer, because it is a teaching process. That is when you are the most focused, and that is when you are more in tune, that is when you are listening, and that is when you can learn. As far as that part, I have seen plenty of people from different cultures, especially older people, who are unable to memorize any Arabic, who refuse to pray because they were told that the only true way to pray is if you know Arabic. And that is absolutely false. That is absolutely false. A matter of fact, for those people who don't speak Arabic, reciting the Quran in a language they don't understand is even counterproductive, because they don't have a clue what they are saying. They don't have a clue what they are learning. Is just nothing. To them, it literally means nothing. If they don't know the meaning of the words, then what benefit did they gain from them? And if you think, oh yeah, they gained benefit, no, they didn't, because go ahead and recite those same verses in a language you understand or a language they understand, and then you will see some of them just simply describe behaviors and how you're supposed to behave. So what benefit do you have if you hear that? It's not even a prayer, it's instruction. So what benefit do you have from an instruction that doesn't help you at all, that you can't understand? God does say in the Quran, when talking about Arabs, this Arabic language, says, and we did not send any messenger but with the language of his people. And this is chapter 14, verse 4. So that he might explain to them clearly that God makes whom he please err, and he guides whom he pleases, and he is the mighty, the wise. So language is important. And I think it would be very beneficial for every Muslim to understand the Arabic language. But is it absolutely necessary to pray? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because at some point, as an adult, at some point when you learn another language, and anybody who has ever learned another language understands this, you translate whatever you say in a different language, you translate it to your own language. So whether you translated it, whether Arabic words come out of your mouth and then you're translating in your mind as you speak, or you just say what you're thinking, what you remember, it's the same thing. It's not like God is not going to understand you. And it's not like you're going to make mistakes because you're not saying it in perfect Arabic. Because those same things, you're translating them in your head anyway. So you are hearing what you are translating anyway. So whether you say it out loud or do it in your head, it doesn't matter. You can pray. You should pray when you're by yourself or with your family in a language you understand. In the mosques, I understand. It's whatever tradition. You can pray in Arabic. It's not terrible, but especially when you're by yourself, you should do it in a language you understand without thinking about it twice. Again, and recite what your Lord has revealed to you of the book. You are supposed to learn this. You have to learn this. And then prayer keeps away from indecency and evil. So, not only are you supposed to learn the rules and remember God through prayer, but it helps you. It keeps you away from doing evil stuff, from putting yourself in evil situations, from just really hurting yourself. For somebody that has been an atheist and lived a terrible life like me, I can totally grasp this concept easily because it affects me personally. I've done things in my life that I didn't want to do, and I couldn't stop doing them. Right? But when prayer came, when you start praying, you get to choose what's more important, prayer or what I desire to do. And you have to pray several times a day. So you have to find even if you're in a bad environment, it stops. Things stop. And when you pray, if you are sincere, you start to realize, hey, I'm in a bad place. I shouldn't be here. And it may not save you immediately and perfectly every single time, but it helps. If you make prayer the most important part of your life, which it should be, because God tells you that the righteous, if you claim to be a Muslim, prayer should be the most important part of your life, because God defines the muttaqeen, the people who are righteous, the people who are careful of their duty, as those who pray. So if you consider yourself a Muslim, no matter what your shortcomings are, prayer should not be one of them, just for that reason alone. Not to mention the reasons I already listed, that the greatest purpose of prayer is remembrance of God, and without remembrance of God, nobody can be successful. And what happens when you abandon remembrance of God? You go on thinking that you're doing fine, but you're not. So For those two reasons, prayer should be the most important part of your life. And now, when you realize it protects you, let's say you're an addict, all right? And I'm going to talk about addiction too, because it's an important part of today's society, and it's an important part of the strategies of the devil that uses it against us. So let's say you are an addict. How does prayer protect you? Well, once you become sincere to God, you should want to keep up all prayers. That should be your goal, period. God forbids praying when you are intoxicated. In chapter 4, verse 43, it says, "O you who believe, do not go near prayer when you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying." So this is a very revealing verse. Number one, you can't go pray when you're high or drunk or anything. You can't. It's not allowed. God doesn't want to hear your stuff because you don't know what you're saying. God doesn't want to hear you. But God says, until you know what you are saying. So God doesn't condemn you for this. God invites you back. He says, all right, you screwed up. But now, just clear your mind, know what you are saying, come back to me, and try again. So, prayer is a sin. Prayer is a sin. Intoxicants are a sin in of itself, but God doesn't really condemn you for it. But they do keep you away from prayer. So if you have to choose intoxicants or prayer. And for somebody who has bad problems with addiction, just sticking to prayer is going to keep you away from the majority of your problems. You may fail sometimes, but as long as you get up, you realize that God wants you back, you should be fine. But God also explains in the Quran that the devil is trying to keep us away from remembrance of God, and one of those ways is intoxicants and gambling. So prayer is a weapon against that. God says in the Quran, "O you who believe, intoxicants and gambling and altar setup and divining arrows are abominations of the devil. They're an abomination of the devil. Avoid them that you may be successful. Surely the devil is trying to introduce hatred and animosity among you by means of intoxicants and gambling, and to keep you away from remembrance of God and from prayer. Will you not then stop?" This is in the Quran. This is what Prophet Muhammad taught people. This is what God told Prophet Muhammad. The devil is trying to keep you away from prayer through means of intoxicants and gambling. And he is. If you can't pray intoxicated and all he has to do is get you high, God says you cannot pray intoxicated until you know what you're saying. All he has to do is keep you high. You forget about God. You get that devil stuck with you, the one that that you get once you forget, once you neglect the remembrance of God, and you think you're doing fine, and your life is sinking and sinking and sinking and sinking. And before you know it, either you gambled your life away, your family left you, or you're just a junkie on the street all by yourself. Prayer. Without prayer, you can't make it. The generations that, like I said before, you couldn't make it without it, and we can't either. So, if you think that prayer is an obligation to you for you to worship God because God needs your worship, you're wrong. Sometimes these preachers, they portray it that way, I think they're going about it all wrong, because it's really illogical the way they put these multipliers on these prayers, and just you pray this day, you get this special treat, you get that, pray this day, you get that special treat. It's not how it works. That is not what God explained in the Quran. Prayer is for you. It is a tool for people who are weak, like me, like us, who can't extricate themselves from the problems of life. Prayer is a tool for us. And one more verse that I remember, I can't remember the reference to it, but it says basically through prayer in God, hearts find rest. It is also a cure for depression. Try it. As a Muslim, if you believe that you are a Muslim, you have to understand that prayer is everything. Everything. For you, prayer is everything. It serves the greatest purpose ever, remembrance of God. If you fail in that, you're going to think you're on the right path, and you will totally not be. It keeps you away from indecency and evil. It teaches you what the laws of God are. It is a cure for depression. It helps with depression. It helps with all of these things. And it is a mark of people who are careful of their duty. So, not to pray is not wise. And whatever your limitations are, if somebody convinced you that you can't pray because you don't know Arabic, it's time to get some confidence and kick that opinion to the curb. If you do not know how to pray, there are plenty of books out there that explain a traditional way to pray, and there's nothing wrong with that. In the Quran, prayer is described as using two Arabic words, ruku and sujud. You bow to God and you prostrate yourself, which are the two greatest forms of submission of deference to authority. They are gestures that signify obedience and submission. And if you can't figure out, or just don't know how, or whatever, bow to God, memorize some verses of the Quran, memorize some prayers from the Quran, because Quran actually does have prayers in it, and just start that way. It's not going to hurt you. All it can do is help you. That's all. You have to start someplace. You think that reciting the Quran is going to hurt you if you stand with your legs differently, or if you bow the wrong way, or if you do something wrong as far as traditional prayer wise. Even different Muslim sects pray differently. Just depends which sect. They have differences. They don't have huge differences, but they have differences. If you're by yourself at home, you can pray. Even if you don't know how to pray, you can pray. And you should pray. And if you want to learn how to pray, you can go to the mosque, you can go wherever, and they'll teach you how to pray. You can even buy books. You can go on YouTube and learn how to pray. But just remember, if they are not reciting the Quran in those prayers, then they're not doing it right. If they are not bowing and they're not falling, they're not prostrating themselves, they're not doing it right. You have to fulfill those basic requirements, and your prayer is fine. Prayer is there to serve you. It is not there to serve God. It is there to help you. You have to realize those things. Use the tools that God gave you, or you're not going to make it. You can't make it without the tools. You can't fix a car without the tools. You think you can fix yourself without the tools that God gave you. Prayer is one of them. It is the most important tool. Without that tool, you will most certainly not be successful, and yet you're going to think that you're doing fine, just like God said in the Quran. So you have to start praying if you consider yourself to be a Muslim. Please.